Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are taking a deeply immersive virtual field trip that is honestly going to completely shatter those old dumb caveman stereotypes you might have floating around in your head. We're going to dive into the daily lives, the absolutely brilliant engineering, the clothing, the tools, and the surprisingly profound social bonds of our closest ancient relatives, the Neanderthals. Get ready, because we're about to completely rethink what it means to be human.
Picture this. You're stepping into a pitch-black cave. You're walking hundreds of meters deep, navigating these incredibly tight, dangerous passages. Now imagine doing all of that roughly 176,000 years ago. That is long, long before modern Homo sapiens ever even set foot in Europe. So who was down there doing this, and maybe more importantly, why? Here's the roadmap for our journey today. First, we'll go inside the Brunicle Cave. Second, we'll look at chemistry and sticky tools. Third, altruism and social care. Fourth, rituals of the dead. And finally, we'll talk about your very own inherited Neanderthal DNA.
All right, let's kick things off with part 1, inside the Brunicle Cave. Let's start by taking a virtual torchlit walk 336 meters deep into the incredibly dark, tight tunnels of the Brunicle site in southwestern France. As you walk further and further away from the daylight, it gets seriously hard to navigate. But at the very end of this pitch-black path, researchers found something mind-blowing. Massive, artificial ring structures built entirely out of broken stalagmites. But how do we actually know when they were built? Well, think of dating methods like different types of historical clocks. At first, researchers tried using carbon-14 dating, but that clock essentially stops ticking. It maxes out around 47,600 years. It just couldn't measure something this old. So scientists brought in a different clock, uranium series dating. And this method proved the site is a staggering 176,500 years old. Since early Neanderthals were the only humans living in that area at the time, they had to be the builders.
Let's just break down the sheer physical effort this took. They weren't just randomly piling rocks, no way. First, they deliberately calibrated the stalagmites, actually trimming them down to specific average lengths, about 34.4 centimeters for the large ring. Then they transported these heavy materials in absolute darkness, relying entirely on the controlled use of fire just to see. Finally, they systematically stacked around 400 of these pieces into complex continuous rings. This level of deliberate planning and group coordination, it strongly implies they had complex language skills to communicate and actually execute these blueprints together.
2.2. That's the number of tons of limestone, broken stalagmites that they moved and arranged. I really want you to pause and think about the weight of that. Why would a group of hominins drag over 2 tons of rock in the pitch dark just to build rings and heat them with fire? We still don't know for sure if it was a temporary refuge or if it had some deeply symbolic, ritualistic purpose. But it absolutely proves they had highly advanced social organization.
Moving right along to section 2, chemistry and sticky tools. So their ingenuity wasn't just limited to stacking stones. It actually extended into advanced chemistry. Archaeologists found what is essentially a 65,000-year-old glue factory in a cave in Gibraltar. Just like a modern manufacturing or baking process, this took incredibly strict temperature control. By running thermal analysis on the leftover charcoal, researchers verified that these Neanderthals gathered plant resin, built a hearth, and heated it in a precisely controlled oxygen-deprived environment to exactly 300 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 150 degrees Celsius. The result? They extracted a super sticky tar, which they used to glue stone points onto their wooden hunting spears.
And that perfectly highlights the raw, harsh reality of the environment they lived in. To put it in perspective, at the Lockhart de Sunbrelad site in Jersey, archaeologists recovered a mammoth skull that literally has a mammoth rib driven straight into the side of its head. It is a brutal, stark reminder of the massive, dangerous megafauna these groups were tracking, hunting, and taking down using those very same glued spears and coordinated group tactics.
What's really fascinating here is the aftermath of the hunt. When you look closely at the bones left behind, like a mammoth shoulder blade from that same site, you can see distinct, deep cut marks scraped right into the bone. This proves they were systematically butchering these massive animals, scraping away muscle and extracting the marrow using incredibly sophisticated stone tools. They were highly skilled butchers, making sure absolutely no resource went to waste.
All right, section 3, altruism and social care. Let's shift gears for a minute and move from brains to heart. Because survival in the brutal, freezing climate of the Pleistocene wasn't just about having sharp tools, sticky tar, or warm clothing. It was profoundly about empathy. We're talking about altruism. Early hominins providing selfless care for the vulnerable members of their group, even when it offered zero direct physical benefit to the group's immediate survival. The Neanderthals didn't just abandon their weak to the elements.
To truly grasp this, take the story of a little 6-year-old Neanderthal child nicknamed Tina. Her remains were found in Spain, dating back over 146,000 years. When scientists analyzed her inner ear bone, they found pathologies associated with Down syndrome. Tina suffered from severe hearing loss and intense vertigo. In a landscape that harsh, a child with those disabilities simply could not survive on her own. Her making it to age 6 strictly depended on the compassionate, around-the-clock care and altruism of her Neanderthal family. Which brings us to Section 4, Rituals of the Dead. When we look at how they handle the end of life, we find even more evidence of their complex inner worlds. Between 90,000 and 120,000 years ago, both modern humans and Neanderthals actually started burying their dead, often placing items in the graves with them. But they had distinctly different cultural traditions. While our ancestors, early Homo sapiens, usually buried their dead in a fetal position outside of caves, Neanderthals buried their dead in all sorts of different positions, and almost exclusively inside caves. They had their own deeply ingrained, unique rituals for mourning.
But despite this rich, beautiful culture, they eventually vanished. Why? Well, a massive 2024 discovery in France's Rhone Valley, a Neanderthal nicknamed Thorin, shed a ton of light on this. Researcher Ludovic Slimok posed a brilliant question about it. He asked, how could populations live completely isolated for 50,000 years when they were literally only a 2-week walk apart from each other?
The answer was hiding right there in Thorin's highly inbred DNA. It showed that his lineage had been geographically isolated and socially fragmented for thousands of years. These recent discoveries really clarify their extinction. It's not that modern humans just actively hunted them down and wiped them out. Instead, as the climate changed and times got tough, Homo sapiens relied on vast, interconnected social networks to survive. Neanderthals, on the other hand, were out-networked. They lived in highly introverted, isolated groups, which left them incredibly vulnerable when the environment turned against them.
And finally, Section 5, Your Inherited Neanderthal DNA.
Here is the wildest part. The Neanderthals didn't completely vanish. They were actually absorbed into our own gene pool. Because of this, if you have non-African ancestry, your genome is likely around 2% Neanderthal. And that ancient DNA is actively influencing your health right now. On the plus side, we inherited Neanderthal genes for certain pregnancy hormones that increase fertility and lower the risk of miscarriage. But on the downside, those same ancient variants make modern humans more susceptible to things like allergies, type 2 diabetes, depression, nicotine addiction, and even severe immune responses like we see with COVID-19.
They also passed down an incredible understanding of the natural world. By analyzing calcified dental plaque, the calculus scraped from Neanderthal teeth at the El Cedrón cave in Spain, scientists found chemical evidence of cooked starchy foods and wood smoke. But amazingly, they also found traces of medicinal plants containing compounds called azulonides. They literally possessed medical knowledge. They were deliberately consuming specific plants to self-medicate. They were early master chemists of nature.
But there is still one fascinating genetic mystery left to solve. Even though we carry all this Neanderthal DNA, the male Neanderthal Y chromosome has completely vanished from the modern human gene pool. Why did that happen? Well, science is still trying to decode the whole story, but a leading theory is that when an ancient human mother was pregnant with a male Neanderthal hybrid, her immune system might have attacked the unfamiliar Y chromosome, resulting in a miscarriage. So, over countless generations, that specific male line just slowly disappeared.
So as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought. We started way deep in the pitch-black tunnels of the Brunekell cave, marveling at their engineering, their empathy, and their brilliant chemistry. But this story doesn't just end in the ancient dirt. It ends right there in your cells. Look at your immune responses, your allergies, your unique traits today. How much of the extinct Neanderthal still lives, breathes, and survives within you right now? Keep asking those big questions, keep exploring, and I'll see you in the next explainer.